Well, as all of you know, I was in Oregon this last week, back in original home. Always got to be careful when you throw around the word home, because home is, some people say home is where your heart is. Some people say home is where you hang your hat. I say home is where you have a lawn that needs to be mowed when you get back. That's home. Especially when you just upped your watering to summer watering schedule. Yeah, that was a good day yesterday. A lot of yard work. I was back in Beaverton, Oregon. That's hometown for me. I was born in St. Vincent Hospital, just 5 minutes away from where my parents currently live. My dad actually lives in the same neighborhood that he lived in when he was a young man. His brother lives 5 minutes from there. Grandma and Grandpa live 5 minutes from there. They all go to Beaverton Church of Christ, which is where we've attended for, our family's entire existence in Oregon, practically. At the moment, though, the Beaverton Church of Christ does not have elders. Of course, I'm not sharing that as any kind of church gossip or anything. I just simply want to state the reality that sometimes even very, very strong congregations, which Beaverton is, it's a strong congregation that does a lot of good work, that does have good leadership, but even a very strong congregation can at times, just because of circumstances out of their control, find themselves without an eldership. One or both men, all three of them, all four of them, however many there are, might have to step down for one reason or another, which really leads to the question of who's waiting in the wings then to take over the leadership? If something were to happen to our elders here at Monte Vista, what would we be doing? Sometimes churches have to scramble around because they don't seem to have a plan B for what's supposed to happen. You know that as much as we like our elders, they're not going to live forever. I think, we wish that they would. We certainly hope that we got a lot more mileage left on them, but they're not going to live forever. So I think the question then for our congregation moving forward is, what are we going to be like 5 years from now? Or 10 years from now? How about 20 years from now? Some churches don't even think about that. Some churches, it's not even on their radar. They're just so happy to have elders at the moment, strong leadership, people that they look up to, shepherds of the flock, that they don't even think about what might happen someday when those men really have to face the reality of either retirement because of old age or another circumstance that's more tragic. So, do we have a plan in place? Now, I'm not saying we put something down on paper and sit down in a men's meeting and talk about who's going to be the elders in 10 years and 20 years and have it all mapped out. I'm just saying, do we intentionally train up our young men, as well as their families, for the position in the congregation of serving as a shepherd? A question that I like to throw around is, do you see yourself as an elder someday? Now, I don't ask this necessarily of 50-year-old men, but I ask it of 20-year-old men, 30-year-old men, 40-year-old men. Do you see yourself as an elder someday? It sneaks up on some elders. Sometimes they don't think that they're elder material until it really hits them all of a sudden. Leadership can be like that sometimes. And some of the best leaders are leaders who've had to be thrust into the position because of necessity in the circumstance. One writer put it really well, the predicament. Today, many churches exist without elders. For some, elders just seem like a luxury. For others, they're a hassle. Still others make the position unattainable for any imperfect human being, and I suspect that's by design sometimes. If you can keep a church from having elders, then you can keep power consolidated more often than not with a few unqualified men, or dare I say one, like a preacher. However, few churches intentionally train and develop Christians for this leadership position. While we do an outstanding job identifying, training, and developing evangelists, elders seem to be an afterthought. The writer goes on to wonder later on in this article whether we could truly answer the question of who will be our elders, again, 5, 10, or 20 years down the road. There's a great need in every church for good, strong men to lead as leaders. No other system was set up by God. And I'll repeat, no other system was set up by God. I hold this to be an opinion, but I think it's a biblical one. I do not believe that there is any leadership structure that mankind can invent that is better or more effective than an eldership. An eldership made up of fully qualified men who have families who support them in their work and who are desirous of the role of leader, shepherd, presbyter. There is no other system we can invent that's better than that. Now, sometimes churches have to go to business meetings or democracies or whatever man-invented system you want to come up with. It is not an eldership. It never will be. It will never be as effective, it will never be as good, and it will never be as biblical as an eldership. We have several examples here. I like in Titus 1 verse 5 how evangelists like Titus are given the charge to set up elderships. It's a solemn duty. We are appointed to appoint elders. It's a mission that evangelists are given. Not totally the evangelist's job. But I always kind of think, and one person told me a good piece of advice. He said, in a sense, not literally speaking, but in a sense, an evangelist's job is not done until there are elders in every congregation. For this reason I left you in Crete, that you might set in order what remains and appoint elders in every city as I directed you. That was something that Titus was supposed to be doing. Part of his work as an evangelist, a preacher, a minister, whatever term you want to use, part of his work was to make sure that every church where he went at least had something going on in terms of appointing elders. Whether there were men qualified or not, he was to make sure that there was something going on, that we're working toward the goal, that we see it as a goal, that we have a plan in place for making it happen. And if there are men qualified, get rid of the stumbling blocks, get rid of people's excuses, overcome those things, and appoint elders in every city as Paul the Apostle directed you. Acts chapter 14, verse 23, and when they had appointed elders in every church, having prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Of course, with all this being said, how should we look to the future and intentionally develop the men of this congregation into potential elders? Like the previous writer already said, let's elucidate another point here from his article. From the early stages of a church, Paul and other evangelists sought out leaders to shepherd the congregations. We intentionally train evangelists for new churches. We encourage young people to enter the ministry. We should carry the same passion into training others to shepherd churches. Being intentional about elder development gives a church hope for the future. Now, I'm not suggesting anything crazy or outlandish like developing elder training schools or something like that. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I do like that there's an attitude here, an attitude that leads to a consequence, a very good one. That if Monte Vista says, we are going to develop men who are elder material, and I don't mean that term facetiously at all. I think you know what I mean by it. But we as a congregation are going to make it a goal that there are 30-year-old men, 20-year-old men, 40-year-old men who are looking forward to being elders one day. And that they're doing what they need to be doing as 20, as 30, as 40-year-old men to prepare themselves and their families for the awesome responsibility and sometimes very heavy job of being a shepherd of a congregation. And we need to look very intentionally at the young men of our congregation, from the youngest all the way to those who are just on the cusp of being qualified, and see what are we doing as a church to help those young men. What are we doing as a church to encourage them? What are we doing for their families, for their wives, for their children, to make sure that they are prepared for that awesome responsibility as well? With all that being said then, let's think about the idea of being shepherds in a congregation. We are not just shepherds of a congregation when we become elders. We've had a lifetime of practice in a lot of other areas of life. You don't just become an elder overnight. You don't just become a shepherd in an instant. It does not take just somebody laying his hands on you or putting a sign on the door or making an announcement before the church to suddenly turn you into a shepherd when you become an elder. People who are elders have been shepherds for a long time already. Not in an official capacity in a congregation, but in many other areas of life. So with this lesson, what I want to do is look at some of the ways that 20 and 30 and 40-year-old men can look at their own lives right now, right as they are, married, unmarried, kids, no kids, whatever situation you're in as a young man, what can you be doing now to prepare yourself to shepherd in all those different areas of life, and eventually to step up when the time is there to shepherd in a congregation that needs leadership. Let's think about, first of all, making time for our families. We need to develop a habit as younger men, especially early on in a marriage. We need to make it a habit to devote time to the people we care about, most intimately. Your wife comes first in all things. I think sometimes we have this misconception, as a side note, we have this misconception that when kids come along, kids are a part of our marriage somehow. No. Your kids will never be a part of your marriage. Your marriage is between you and your spouse, and that's it. Kids are a part of your family, but they come, and hopefully they go someday. They come and they go. You get 20 years with them, and it's funny, you start off just the two of you. Kids come along. It's a hectic couple of decades, and then the kids are gone, and what are you left with? Well, you're still left with the same wife you had before. They are never a part of your marriage. So make time for your spouse first and foremost. That has to be priority number one. Make time for your kids second. Because if you're able to make time for them, that's a skill that's going to translate into the congregation. Hey, only one of our elders is retired. The other two still have jobs, which means they have to be good managers of their own time. And the way that they were able to make time for the important things in life when they were younger is a skill that helps them now as working elders to make time for the important things in the congregation. Are our elders at social functions? Yes, they are. Do they make time to visit people in the hospital? Yes, they do. If you need to talk to one of our elders, is one of them always going to be available to talk? Sure. You might have to call each of the three of them to find one that is available at the time, but that's the great thing about having multiple elders, isn't it? Make time for the things that are important, like your family. Being defensive of your family is an important key also. You, as the father, are the warrior in your family. You're the defender. And I don't say that in any kind of chauvinistic sense. I say it as a real thing. You are the warrior in your family. Be defensive of them. Know who's coming and who's going. Know who your kids are spending time with. Are parents at home when they're going to a friend's house? Are adults supervising social functions? Know what's going on and be defensive of them. Just as we're charged in the Bible to be defensive of a congregation. You remember in Acts chapter 20, verses 28 through 31, when Paul was speaking to the elders from Ephesus, he charged them to be ultra defensive of the congregation where they were serving. Because he says there are savage wolves who will sneak in sheep's clothing, and they've come to devour the flock. Now, I'm not saying be suspicious of everybody who comes into your family, but I think that there's a healthy dose of suspiciousness, suspicionosity that needs to come as being a father, a leader, and a defender of your family. Embrace that you are being watched. I always really like it when Paul is talking to his young charge Timothy in one of his epistles here. I like the way that he puts it here in 1 Timothy chapter 4. He says in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and in verse 15, speaking to Timothy, take pains with all these things, as in your Bible study, your devotion to the Word of God, your ability to teach and present it publicly. Take pains with these things, he says. Be absorbed in them so that your progress may be evident to all Pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. And I know that Paul doesn't use these exact words, but I think part of that is pay close attention to yourself and your teaching because a lot of other people are as well. A lot of other people are paying close attention to you as well. Now, the temptation as a young man is, young men, we don't like it. People are judging me. I don't have to live in a glass house. You make me live in a bubble. Hey, try being a preacher sometime, okay? Instead of shunning the attention, instead of being offended that people are watching you, sometimes for the wrong motives, admittedly, watching to see if you'll trip up, watching to see if you'll fail, instead of being offended by that, see it as a challenge. Embrace it. Welcome it. Tell the world, yes, you can examine my life. And I will allow my progress, my maturity, my learning, I will allow that to be evident to everybody. It will be evident to all people. I'm not afraid of investigation. I'm not afraid that people know that I'm the same person at home that I am in public. Embrace that. Accept that. Because I think you could ask any of our 3 elders, that idea of people watching you, examining you, keeping an eye on you, does not get any better when you become an elder. Management, even with difficult cases. You remember one of the qualifications of being an elder is that he's a manager of his household. He manages his children. Now, are some children easier than others? Yes, they are. I have 3. One of my children usually just sits on the floor cooing at herself. Another one of my children is fully mobile and knows how to unlock doors. So you tell me, are some children more difficult than others? But the charge is to manage your household, manage your children. Now that skill then, that skill translates to the congregation. And this is not a knock on anybody here personally. This is not some underhanded thing. And I'm not like wink, wink, talking at you in the back or something. But some church members are more difficult than others as well. Some people are just headaches. That doesn't mean that you can't be loved. It doesn't mean that people don't care about you or that you don't contribute something or that you're not valuable. But you know what? Some people are just difficult. Some people are just harder than others. And when you become an elder, just like when you were a father with your children, the management of your household, some church members are harder to deal with than others. So you see how the skill translates there. From parent, from father, manager of a household, to shepherd of a congregation. Self-control as well, inside and outside of the home. One of the qualifications of elders, 1 Timothy 3 verse 3, is that they are self-controlled in all things. That they're temperate. Can you be temperate as a 20-year-old? Can you be temperate as a 30-year-old? Can you be temperate as a 40-year-old? And if you haven't been practicing self-control for 50 years of your life, don't expect self-control to just magically come to you when the time comes for you to become an elder. Don't just expect to suddenly realize some unfound, some previously unknown source of self-control and temperance. I hate this idea of sowing your wild oats. I know that's kind of a side point, but I hate that. That's one of my least favorite phrases of all. I hate the idea that young men dismiss themselves and say, well, when you're young, you got to sow your wild oats. What? Because you're so naive that you think that when you make mistakes and indulge and practice little self-control at 20, that's not going to have an impact on you 10 years later or 20 years later or 30 years later down the road? Why do you think it's going to be easier to practice self-control later if you don't practice it right now? So if you're 20, if you're 30, whatever, don't dismiss yourself. Just because you're young does not give you permission to sow any wild oats. Self-control is something that needs to be practiced from a very early age. Learn from your failures as well. Sometimes your kids are going to fail you. Sometimes your kids are going to disappoint you. Now, you love them and support them nevertheless. That's what a good parent does. Sometimes you're the failure, though. Sometimes it was because of your parenting that something traumatic happened in your family. Sometimes you punish too hard. Dads have a tendency to do that. Sometimes we punish a little harder than we ought to. Learn from that. Don't get defensive when your wife sits you down and says, that was probably a bit hard. That one was a little strict. You might have come down a little hard that time. Don't get defensive. Learn from it. Learn from the failures. Learn from the failures. Teaching and leading starts in the home as well. Ephesians 6 and verse 4 says that we are charged to teach our children the ways of the Lord. We're to lead our wives spiritually, Ephesians 5 and verse 23. And since teaching and leading are required of all elders, since it is essential to the eldership, 1 Timothy 3 verse 2, 1 Timothy 5 and verse 17, then I think we can see very clearly that when we are teachers and leaders in our homes, that skill translates into becoming teachers and leaders in the congregation. But really, do you even desire the office? Well, I'm only 30. I don't really desire the office right now. I'm already the preacher. I've got enough stuff on my plate as it is, right? Think of it this way. You might not desire the office now. But what if you desire the office 20 years from now? What if you do desire it later? I'm always really wary of people who make rash decisions as a young man, because I always want to tell them, okay, all right, that sounds good right now. Okay, that idea of yours sounds really good. Getting a tattoo on this side of your face sounds good now. Now, I'm joking about that, of course, but you know, these ideas that we have as young men, they sound good now. But I was really aware that I say, okay, but put yourself in the position of your 50-year-old self. Put yourself in the shoes of mature, grown-up Ryan, and think about what 50-year-old Ryan would think about 30-year-old Ryan. Are you doing your future self a disservice by the mistakes and the poor choices that you're making right now? You might not want to be an elder right now. That might not even be on your radar. You're a young man. You're not even remotely qualified. I get it. The word elder is in itself a word that means older man. And at 30, I don't care how much gray hair I have, I'm not old. But don't do anything now that 50-year-old you is going to regret later. Don't do anything now that might prevent 50-year-old you from even being considered as an elder. You might not want it now, but you might want it later. And don't close doors and burn bridges so early in life. 1 Timothy 3 verse 1 says, "It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do." I might even add, there is no finer work that a man can do in any official capacity in a congregation. Preachers are great. Deacons are necessary. But we need good elders. We need good elders. And it's a good work that man aspires to. Do you desire it? You might not now, but you might later. A man is only fooling himself, therefore, if he thinks that having faithful children is something that he'll just have to worry about when they're teenagers. A man is only fooling himself if he believes that a reputation can be earned quickly and only when it's convenient. A man is only fooling himself if he suddenly desires the eldership and thinks that he can make up for past wrongdoing overnight. A man is only fooling himself if he believes that what he does at the age of 25 will have no effect on his candidacy for the eldership at 55. A man is only fooling himself if he thinks that the qualities and qualifications of an elder do not apply to him at all, or that those qualities are just for exceptional A+ Christians, and he's fine just being a normal Christian. And a man is only fooling himself if he believes that God expects less of him just because he is not an elder. You know, you have a unique set of skills that only you bring to the table. But the problem is that sometimes people look at their skills and they think, well, I'm not really elder material. I've known elders in the past and I'm nothing like them. I don't have the same compassion of that elder that I knew. I don't have the same wisdom of this other elder that I knew. I don't have that same quick decision-making ability of another elder that I knew. I don't see myself being an elder someday. And yet you do contribute something, and you have something special about you. There's not a special class of Christians that gets to be elders. At least as far as personality goes, as far as skills go, as far as what you can bring to the table. Now, we understand from 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1 that we are given a complete picture of the qualifications of an elder. If you want to know what an elder is supposed to be, you read those two passages and you know. And I don't think there's anything missing from those passages. I don't think there's anything that we have to add or guess about. I think that they are a complete picture of what an elder is supposed to be. And yet, are some of those qualifications fairly open-ended? Yeah. Let's think of a good example here. In 1 Timothy 3 and verse 2, it states that an elder should be able to teach. And yet, in the same letter, in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 17, Paul says that some elders work hard at preaching and teaching. Now, the inference then is that if you're supposed to give due honor to an elder, especially to those who preach and teach, the inference is that some elders are not especially good at preaching and teaching, at least in a public way. So when we see able to teach, we have to kind of come up with a solution here, where Paul says you must be able to teach, but he also acknowledges that some elders are exceptional preachers and teachers. Well, I think when you look at this idea of able to teach, that's a very open-ended qualification. I don't think that means necessarily that you have to be able and willing to get up and teach an adult Bible class. I don't think that necessarily means that you have to be one who preaches on a regular basis. Are there different ways that a person can teach? Yeah. Teaching is a very generic term. I'll give you a good example. One of our elders at Wiley, really fine man. I've always adored him. He is not really a public speaker. That wasn't his thing. That wasn't a gift or a skill that God had blessed him with. He was a fairly shy individual. He was uncomfortable in front of people, except when he was leading songs. Good song leader. And yet, he taught the toddler class. And so it's kind of funny, like picturing an elder teaching the toddler class. He and his wife would be in there together, and she would do all the little songs and the projects, and then he would sit and teach the lesson for the day, whatever that lesson happened to be. Was that man able to teach? Yeah. He taught in his own way. Maybe not in a way that we typically think of. Maybe not in a real public way, but he was able to teach. Other elders are able to teach privately. They might be able to sit down with somebody around the dinner table and explain a concept or help correct a sin in somebody else's life. So just because he's not preaching it in a sermon doesn't mean he's not teaching. Others teach by example. They teach more with their actions, by their hospitality, than they can with their words. So yes, the qualification is able to teach, but it's very open-ended. And a lot of the other qualifications are like that as well. So as we study these together at different times, just remember, you might not think of yourself as elder material, but don't undersell the value that you could bring someday to the eldership. Don't undersell or undervalue your set of skills, though they might be unique and even unconventional at times. The last point that we'll make this evening is that sometimes it sneaks up on you. Some of the very best elders I have ever known almost had to be convinced that they were qualified for the position. You practically had to sit them down and lay it out for them, which I guess is a better alternative than somebody who seems a little too eager for the position. Somebody who's parading himself around or who enjoys advertising his qualifications. I would rather deal with somebody with a humility problem than somebody with a pride problem, or somebody who's campaigning for the position of elder. Sometimes it sneaks up on you. And I think that in a lot of ways that's how it should be. Because the man who's living the way he should be, the man who's a leader in his home, who teaches his children, a man who is always hospitable from his youth to his old age, a man who stands up for truth, both publicly and privately, A man who's able to teach and correct those who are living in error. A man who jumps at the opportunity to serve, even if it means getting his hands dirty, or if it comes at some personal cost to him. Like I said earlier in the lesson, those guys are already shepherds. They're already shepherds. And you might not even realize it. It'll sneak up on you. Now, when it does, don't be sheepish about it. Don't undersell yourself. Don't undervalue yourself. Don't have false modesty about, well, I never really thought of myself that way, or I don't know, I just don't think I'm ready. I think there's qualified men out in the world who are going through life not serving as elders because they just can't accept that they should be. That's a great hurdle to overcome, isn't it? Self-perception is a difficult thing, and it's tricky as well. It's difficult when you have other people telling you that they see you as a leader without seeming too eager about it. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really glad that 30-year-old men aren't qualified to be elders. I don't know if my ego could handle it. We appoint men as elders who are able to handle it. We appoint men as elders, as Peter says in his epistle. In fact, let's go there and let him speak it himself. We appoint men who don't lord it over other people. Look in 1 Peter chapter 5. I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and never for sordid gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. Isn't it funny the way Peter writes? It's almost like Peter is on a seesaw, and he keeps balancing out his statements, doesn't he? He's like, be eager, but don't be too eager. Jump at the opportunity without, never for sordid gain. He keeps balancing out, because it is a balance. And it takes a mature man to find the balance. It takes a mature man to bury his ego and accept a leadership position that Peter acknowledges is actually quite humble in its nature. Rough, difficult, hard. I made fun of Thomas Kincaid this morning just a little bit. Life is not a Thomas Kincaid picture, though. We are elders in a congregation. We're not talking about shepherds here, like little 12-year-old boys with a big staff and cute little sheep and a sunset in the background. No, elders are rugged. Elders have to be ready for anything. Shepherds have to be ready for wolves. Shepherds have to be ready to fight lions off or thieves when it's one man against the world. A shepherd is not a small boy. A shepherd is not this pastoral idea that we have in artwork. A shepherd, an elder, a pastor is a man who's rugged and ready for action. So you're not qualified now. I get that. You're 20, you're 30, you're 40, whatever. You kids are just little squirts running around getting into mischief. You might not see yourself as elder material in the slightest. But I hope that you grow between now and 20 years from now. Because 20 years from now, we're going to need you really badly. 20 years from now, we're going to need good leaders to step up. And it starts right now. It starts right now. If you're not a Christian here this evening, you really ought to be. First things first, right? Bring Christ into your life. Embrace and accept that He is the Son of God, exactly who He claims to be. That He died for your sins, that He was raised up in newness of life by His own power, that He overcame death so that we could all overcome spiritual death. And He offers that salvation to you now, as He always does, knocking at the door. All you have to do is open the door and let Him in. Whatever needs you might have, please come forward as we stand and sing.